A very warm good morning to all. On behalf of International Management Institute, Kolkata, I take this opportunity to welcome Dr. R.M. Mashelkar, the most decorated scientist of the country. I also welcome Dr. Gokul Dholakia, Director General, IMI. We extend our warm welcome to dignitaries across the city, representatives from the science community and research fraternity, outstanding scientist and head of Accelerated Technology Group, VECCGOI, Professor Shubhimal Shah, former Director ISWBM, Dr. D.K. Sanyal, Professor Prabir Gupta, former advisor IMI and former Dean IIT Kharagpur Vijay Som, faculty of Army Institute, Professor H. Bhaduri from Heritage Institute of Management, delegates and senior officials from public and private organizations, dignitaries from RPSG Group, student community and faculty from different educational institutions across the city, media professional, members of IMI Kolkata family, Honorable Director and Dean IMI Kolkata, students of IMI Kolkata, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome and a happy New Year 2015 to all. On the eve of the New Year, while I was sending our New Year wishes to all, I was wondering what 2015 would hold for us. The UN General Assembly declares 2015 as the year of soil and soil conservation. The UNESCO declares it as the year of lights and light-based technologies, yet some describe it as the International Year of evaluation of policies to make the lives of people better. But when I received the New Year message from Dr. R.M. Mashelkar in the early hours of 1st January 2015, I knew his strong message to the world and to India especially. I would like to share his message with all, of course with his permission. Dr. Mashelkar wrote, Nandita, we are just a few hours into 2015. What would you like 2015 to be? A year full of joy, especially the joy of giving. Let 2015 be a year full of prosperity, especially prosperity for all and not for a few privileged. Let 2015 be the year of peace and prosperity, and we can achieve peace if the world remembers the wise words. Don't open the old wounds in order to examine their origin. Leave them healed. You progress faster. Probably a mantra that we all can adopt and abide by. Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful start-off. Today, we are looking forward to listening to two great luminaries in the field of academics and research. This lecture on reinventing India as an innovation nation is probably the first of its kind and indeed distinguished and distinct. Today, this dais of IMI Kolkata is made auspicious by the presence of two distinguished personalities, Dr. R.M. Mashelkar, Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, and Padma Shri Dr. Gokul Dholakia, Director General IMI. We would like to welcome you, sir, with a bouquet of flowers. We welcome Dr. R.M. Mashelkar. Please welcome Dr. Gokul Dholakia. To mark the beginning of this lecture, I request our dignitaries on the stage to light the inaugural lamp. I now call upon our director, Dr. Arindam Banik, for his welcome address. Professor Banik, a PhD in economics from Delhi School of Economics, has been with IMI since 1994. He has served at very senior positions at IMI. Dr. Banik was with the Department of Economics at the University of West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Barbados, West Indies, as visiting professor for 4 years. Dr. Banik is a columnist for the Barbados Advocate, the Business Authority, the Economic Times, the Hindu Business Line, the Indian Express, the Business Standard, the Daily Star, Anandabazar Putrika, and the Desh, to name a few. Research and consulting are his forte. Dr. Banik's research interests include financial sector and economic growth, international finance and foreign borrowing, trade, investment and competitiveness, measurement of poverty and policy implication, impact and assessment study of public expenditure, technology transfer and multinationals, joint ventures and nature and impact of global finance. Currently, he is the editor of the reputed management journal entitled Global Business Review, published by Sage Publisher. Sir, please give your welcome address.
Good morning. Professors R.A. Mashilkar, Pokul Dholakia, Tirthankar Nayak, Mr. Sunil Bhandari, Professor Ramesh Bail, honor guest, executives from the RP Sanjeev Banka Group, media representatives, faculty, colleagues, students, and staff of IMI Kolkata. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to welcome you to distinguished lecture series to be delivered by eminent scientist Professor R.A. Mashilkar. Special thanks are due to all for gathering here to attend this lecture series. Professor Mashilkar will talk on innovation today. I'll be happy to cite an innovation implemented by late R.P. Goenka. As I stand here today, I recollect the history of IMI Delhi, and then I can see IMI as envisaged in the eyes of late R.P. Goenka during the early 80s. We remember India in the early 80s when inefficiency in our public sector was a normal phenomenon. I must say this was partly because of we are undermanaged. R.P. Goenka, or Rama Babu as he was popularly known to us, thought he could do something about that. The idea of executive MBA program was developed. The country got few managers through IMI. If 1 year executive program is popular now, as a sponsored program globally, I must give full credit to this visionary. I recollect a conversation I once had on this very subject with my colleagues. I was a youth of 36. I was told that I was wasting my time and career. Then strange things happened. Companies were struggling to improve their employees' managerial skill because of the competition. Thus, many company executives were coming forward to executive MBAs in post-1990s to meet such a crisis. Let us congratulate Goenka ji for such a fascinating idea. Then we have introduced our two-year program in Delhi. Today, I am proud to say that I am one of the key contributors along with a few individuals to IMI's intellectual capital. Needless to mention that IMI is well known for this in this country. It was in 2010 that IMI Kolkata was set up with the goal of widening the base for quality management education in Eastern India. In 2014, IAE Tours, a prestigious public university in France, has collaborated with IMI Kolkata for offering our students a joint specialization in marketing. As a part of this collaboration, IMI Kolkata's top 5-7 students in the areas of marketing will have the opportunity to attend classes in University Tours for a month. Tours professor will also take classes in Kolkata. On qualifying, the students will be awarded dual MBA certification and MSc or MBA in Business Administration from University of Tours, France, and a PGDM program from IMI Kolkata. We have also signed collaboration agreement with Sichuan Academy of Social Sciences. I am glad to inform you that Dr. Nag has recently initiated formalities relating to academic collaboration between IMI Kolkata and Institute of South Asian Studies, Sichuan University. At the current level of faculty of the institute continue to be as productive as they have been over the years. During the academic year 2013-14, the faculty remains concentrated on teaching, and their students have direct access to them and even benefit from their instructors being published. The learning process that the lecturers go through translate to the classroom in terms of company experiences, research techniques, and knowledge of subjects. During the period, they have written 5 case studies, 23 number of articles in select journals, 7 book chapters, and 1 book. Number of publications per faculty in an academic year and citation of published research in 5 to 10 years period are considered as a powerful indicator to understand faculty quality. For example, experts consider that H index reflects both number of publications and the number of citations per publications. The London School of Economics found that professors in the social sciences had average H indices ranging from 2.8 to 7.6 in economics. I am happy to inform you that IMIK, a few of our colleagues are in that range. More significantly, 3 of our colleagues have published 6 papers each in this year. As far as research grant is concerned, 2 faculty members have been awarded research grant by both international and Indian agencies. Some of our faculty members have presented research paper in international conferences at Canada, China, Istanbul, and UK. IMIK encourages faculty participation in international forums. The year also witnessed seminars, lectures, and addresses by eminent speakers from academic institutions and corporate sectors. Conferences provide an opportunity to exchange ideas and to create network of individuals working in specific areas. Major thrust is underway to hold a number of conferences at the Institute on a regular basis. For example, IMIK has organized 2 international conferences, one on China, India and beyond, understanding cooperation, competition and development, and the second one on emerging markets, evolving perspectives, held in the month of December this year. 2 books are expected to be published by 6 publishers shortly based on these select papers. Thanks to Professor Bokul Dholakia for giving these ideas to us. The Institute has also witnessed a significant rise in admissions in the academic session 2014-16. While in the first 3 years, that is 2011-13, 12-14 and 13-15, average admissions stood between 20 and 30. This year, 71 number of students were recommended for admission. More interestingly, on an average, about 9.5 number of applicants have struggled to get a seat in the PGDM program at IMIK this year. As our students conquer peak after challenging peak of success, we deem it is our duty to provide them with all support in the form of state-of-the-art infrastructure, providing them with challenging opportunity to push their making. And last but not the least, the required guidance and motivation in the form of reward and recognitions. With these few words, I once again extend a very cordial welcome to one and all of you present here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We now begin the distinguished lecture session on reinventing India as an innovation nation. Dr. Bokul Dholakia would chair the session and take questions from the audience after the distinguished lecture of Dr. Mashilkar. I now request my colleague, Dr. Rituparna Basu, to kindly come up on stage and introduce the 2 great luminaries.
Introducing the very eminent chair for today's distinguished lecture session, Dr. Bokul Dholakia. Dr. Dholakia, the current Director General of International Management Institute, based out of IMI Delhi, is among India's most noted economists who have been awarded the Padma Shri by the Government of India in 2007 for his contributions in the field of education. A gold medalist from Baroda University with a doctorate in economics, Dr. Dholakia occupied the Reserve Bank of India chair position from 1992 to 1999 and served as the 9th director of IIM Ahmedabad from 2002 to 2007. he was appointed as the chairman of the National Board of Accreditation for Technical Education in India by the Government of India from 2005 to 2008. Dr. Dholakia was conferred the Bharat Asmita National Award by the Honorable Chief Justice of India in the year 2008. As a visionary leader, Dr. Dholakia has worked on numerous government committees, including the Rangarajan Committee on Pricing and Taxation on Petroleum Products in 2006, the Expert Group on Pension Fund constituted by the Government of India in 2009, and was associated with the Indian Council of Social Science Research, Government of India, as one of the 3 members responsible for the restructuring of the ICSSR. Dr. Dholakia served as an external director on the boards of several public and private sector companies, including ONGC, Shipping Commission, Torrent Power, Mahanagar Gas, and L&T Power, to name a few. He has also been a consultant to many like the World Bank, Mangalore Stock Exchange, Gujarat Electricity Board, Steel Authority of India Limited, Gujarat Heavy Chemicals Limited. A member of the Advisory Group of Competition Commission of India, Dr. Dholakia is celebrated by many as the demigod of management, owing to his remarkable contribution to the field with his books, monographs, and research papers published in top national and international journals. Prior to joining IMI, he served as the director of Adani Institute of Infrastructure Management and Gujarat Adani Institute of Medical Sciences in Bhuj. He is respected for his bold stance on the autonomy of higher education institutions. With an experience of over 45 years, including 33 years in IIM Ahmedabad, Dr. Dholakia is endowed with an in-depth knowledge, understanding, and practitioner's perspective on quality management education in India. Now introducing our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Raghunath Anand Mashelkar. Dr. Mashelkar, currently the Chancellor of the Academy of Scientific and Innovative Research, an institution of national importance, and the National Research Professor at the National Chemical Laboratory in Pune, is undoubtedly one of the country's most eminent scientists today. Noted as a pathbreaker in the post-independence India by Business India, he has received over 50 awards, including the highest civilian honors of Padma Shri in 1991, Padma Bhushan in 2000, and Padma Vibhushan in 2014, awarded by the President of India in recognition of his contribution to nation building. Having served as the Director General of Council of Scientific and Industrial Research with 38 laboratories and about 20,000 employees for over 11 years, he is presently also the President of Global Research Alliance, a network of publicly funded R&D institutes from Asia Pacific, Europe, and USA with over 60,000 scientists. Dr. Mashelkar, only the 3rd engineer to have been elected in 1998 as Fellow of Royal Society London in the 20th century. He is on the board of directors of several reputed companies such as Reliance Industries Limited, Tata Motors Limited, Hindustan Unilever Limited, ICICI Knowledge Park, a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Microsoft, to name a few. He is the first Asian scientist to receive the Business Week USA Award of Stars of Asia from the hands of George Bush Sr., the former president of USA. As a noted architect of the innovation movement in the country, Dr. Mashelkar is currently the chairman of India's National Innovation Foundation, Reliance Innovation Council, Thermax Innovation Council, and Marico Innovation Foundation. Today, he is a key person in shaping the science and technology policies for the nation as a member of the Scientific Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. and also of the Scientific Advisory Committee to the Cabinet set up by successive governments. The first ever scientist to provide molecular level interpretation of volume phase transitions in super swelling polymers, who has also chaired 12 national level committees to examine a variety of issues, including higher education, national food policy, the drug regulatory system, and the agricultural research system today is listed as one of the 50 most influential people in intellectual property from 19 countries around the world. Dr. Raghunath Anand Mashelkar.
My very dear friend, Dr. Bakul Dholakia, the Director General of IMI, Professor Arindam Mani, Director of IMI, Dr. Tirthankar Nag, the Dean Academics, ladies and gentlemen, especially my young friends up there. May I say, what a great honor, what a great privilege it is to be invited to deliver a lecture in this distinguished lecture series. And it is always great to be first. So thank you very much for doing me the honor. I'm a great admirer of IMI, by the way, for a number of reasons, for a number of years. And in fact, we had a very fascinating discussion just now before coming here over a cup of tea. And I was just saying that teaching without research is sterile, and therefore what is our niche? And Professor Bari very eloquently talked about how we are creating a niche by our research, advanced research in very challenging problems. I'm really impressed to see that, because this is exactly what we need. A connection between education, research and innovation. Because education disseminates known knowledge, research creates new knowledge, and innovation converts that knowledge into wealth and social good. And you will see the top universities of the world, like Harvard, do that wonderfully well. And that's something that must sort of happen here, and I'm very happy to see this happen. The other remark I made was President Obama said about 5 years ago when he was in Cairo that education and innovation are going to be the currencies of the 21st century. I would go a step forward and say education in innovation and innovation in education are going to be the key drivers for the future. And in terms of that, when one looks at innovation in education, how do we do things differently? Because if you continue to do them in the same way that you did in the past, you will get the same results as you got in the past. And we need to distinguish ourselves by doing things differently. And once again, we had a very fascinating discussion on these issues. So I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that in IMI, those two I's should stand for innovation, all right? Somehow or other we must get that I stand for innovation. I think this IMI has a great future. And down the line, I'm sure it will become not only a world-class institution, one of the top few among the management institutions in the country. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to talk about reinventing India as an innovation nation, as you can see. And the word reinventing is very purposely put there. It is almost like, when we say emerging economy and look at India, it is re-emerging economy. China also is a re-emerging economy because between India and China we have 50% share of the world GDP. So I think there is a misnomer when we talk about it. We have to say re-emerging. So it is not inventing India to make it an innovation nation, but reinventing India to make it an innovation nation. I'm not going to give a long talk about our past. I'm going to look only into the future because, as somebody has said, I only think of the future because that is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. It is better that we keep on talking and looking at the future rather than dwelling into the past, how great we were and so on. The interesting figure that you see here will illustrate to you how the technology advancements are the ones which are actually caused this rapid rise in GDP per capita. And you can see right from the breakthrough on printing press to efficient steam engine to internal combustion engine to internet, and of course later on these advances in biotechnology, how they have been responsible. So they are directly linked, and particularly the non-linear growth that you see. Then if you look at India, for example, this is from the book by Jay Narlikar. So it is somewhat subjective, but still it can be taken as an indication. This is something interesting about India's development. And you find, for example, that pre-1950, he talks about Ramanujan, Meghnad-Saha ionization equation, S.N. Bose, and we are very proud that Bose-Einstein particle today is getting the Nobel Prizes, the boson, C.V. Raman, the Raman effect, which won the Nobel Prize. Jen Ramchandran should have got the Nobel Prize. He didn't get for showing that collagen has a triple helical structure, which is far more difficult than the double helix, and he did it with some very rudimentary equipment that was available to him. But that is up to 50s, and they're all individual efforts, as you can see. But as we move forward, you find the nuclear power, the green revolution, and so on, including the CSI transformation, as the greatest achievements. And you can see a distinct difference here. Individual excellence, and here it's organized, publicly funded itself. What is missing in this? What is missing in this is wealth creation through innovation and breakthroughs. We don't see the Microsofts of this world, we don't see the Apples of this world, we don't see the Intels of this world in terms of achievement. And that will change in these next 50 years is what I'm going to actually harp on as we move forward. If you look at the scientific and technological development in India, you'll find that pre-50s, as I said, they were all individual excellence. 50 to 70, it was self-reliance because we didn't have the dollars, and we had to, right from pin to missile, do everything by ourselves. 70 to 90 was technology denial-driven science and technology. Supercomputer was denied. We will say, thank you very much, we'll develop it. Cryogenic engine is deprived that technology. Thank you very much. We'll develop it and so on. 90 to 2010 is a period when intellectual property got generated and we started becoming globally competitive, including the fact that today there are 800 plus companies, top companies, including Fortune 500, where there are R&D centers here employing more than 200,000 scientists and technologists. So the character has completely changed. And of course, our dream now is to achieve this global science and technology leadership. That's the change of the landscape that we have. Then you would say, when you talk about science, technology, and innovation, how are we doing? Well, I don't have a good news here. The Global Innovation Index, you will find India is slipping. Ranked 64 in 12, ranked 66 in 13, slipping to rank 76 in 14. Now, that's a matter of great concern. Why is it happening? Well, one can say that in order to be ahead, you have to run very fast. But if there are people who are running faster than you, no matter how fast you run, if they are faster, you slip in the ranks. That is number one. Number two, it has also to do with the indicators that are used in Global Innovation Index. In fact, I happen to be on the advisory board of Global Innovation Index, and I've talked about it, and I will refer to it a little later, because these are just actually measured in terms of technological innovation and nothing else. But you will find India is superb in non-technological innovation, whether it is business model innovation, system delivery innovation, workflow innovation, and so on and so forth, and that doesn't just get counted. All right, so there are a variety of reasons, no excuses, but one has to put it in perspective. But the fact is, without excuse, we have to move in the top 10. There's no question about that in order to move forward, because innovation-led economic growth, innovation-led competitiveness is going to be the key to our future. I want to give you a perspective on the changing landscape. And I would say there are 5 that stand out. First is, of course, India, 3 freedoms. Now you'll say, what are the 3 freedoms? I'll explain. Second is Indian corporate innovation movement, and there is a lot that is happening. Transformation of public institutions, and I made a reference to that a little earlier. Then emergence as a global R&D platform, I also made a reference to that. And finally, Indian inclusive innovation, on which I will dwell in great detail, because that is very important and that is where we are taking leadership. So what are the 3 freedoms? I think the first freedom is obvious, the political freedom, 1947. I would say the second freedom was 1991. Freedom to compete, by the way. We are a closed economy, and today India has become a darling of the world. We would not have become if that was not the case. All right? Because we were in a situation where industry produced gums which did not stick. We bought them. Industry produced plugs which did not fit. We bought them. Industry produced cars where everything other than the horn made noise. We bought them. It was seller's market, right? All that changed and competition came in, and that was a transformation. And the third freedom, I would say 2008, it is not widely recognized, but that is the time we signed the nuclear deal. And nuclear energy is a small part of it, according to me, because access to technology, is particularly dual-use technology, is going to be extremely critical, as you will see later. So these are the 3 freedoms that we have. Normally when I have time, I go around the audience and ask them what is the 4th freedom they would like to have. But we don't have that time today. So I will leave it, but please think about the 4th freedom. Now, pre-1991, as Henry Ford had said, let the customer have any color of the car as long as it is black. You remember? And then what the Indian government had done, they had said, let the customer have any car as long as it is ambassador of Fiat. Some of us who are old would also remember something called standard, right, Bakul? Those days. Fine. But that changed. And Jayardi had said famously in February 1978, if telco had been allowed to develop as it should have been, I no doubt will be making cars in India, and a Tata car would have been as dominant as the Tata truck is today, but we are not allowed to. You know the reasons. I think ambassadors are now getting close into some monopoly gone, but you remember those particular times, all right? There was no option. And then came Ratan, and in 1993 he created Indica, and that was a game changer, so as to say, you know, in terms of Indian auto industry. And then, of course, spiraling up, he acquired Jaguar Land Rover, and today you understand where we stand vis-a-vis, thanks to 1991, what we have been able to do. In fact, there's an interesting anecdote. I'll take you through this. 2 years ago, the Jet Business School in Cambridge University had invited me to give the first innovation BP lecture, by the way, like this one also, first lecture. I gave it in the evening, and in the morning there was an honorary doctorate that was given to Ratan Tata by Cambridge University. And in the evening, late evening, there was a dinner that was held in his honor. And I remember being invited for that. The director of Cavendish Laboratory was sitting next to me. And somewhere in the middle of the dinner, he pointed towards Ratan and he said, Professor Mashelkar, I hope you recognize that you are looking at an Indian with the biggest employer of British in Britain, in manufacturing, of course. Now, who would have imagined that a day will come where an Indian will become the biggest employer of British in Britain? Would not have happened but for 1991, right? So that is the transformative change that has actually happened. Now, moving forward, the third freedom that I talked about, that 123 opens doors for access to dual-use technology and potential impact on civilian sectors, just as an example. You know, Indian science and technology, it was a saga of denial-driven innovation. There are a number of things which drive innovation. One of them is denial. You know, it's a good thing to have many times, by the way. And whether it's the high-performance supercomputers, nuclear energy, space program, all that actually has happened because of denial-driven. I mean, supercomputer is a classical story. The Param series of computers led finally to teraflops computers and now to petaflops. And I still remember, I preserved this with great pride. Washington Post, after we were able to export these Param supercomputers, had said that angry India does it. India, having been angered at having been denied the technology, developed it on its own. Angry India does it. I often ask, why is India not permanently angry? Angry in the right sense of the way, by the way. You know, it will make, you have to be angry, you have to be hungry, then, you know, innovation flowers. Otherwise you go to sleep somehow like that. Very important. Space, of course, you are aware of our great achievements. Mangalyaan is a classical case, and here it is, frugal innovation in its ultimate. I mean, for doing the same thing, US took $671 million, by the way, as against our $75 million. And frugal innovation is something that I'm going to come back to again and again. However, as far as the Indian innovation story is concerned, this is the cover page of my book, Reinventing India, where there is a chapter that I've written on the story of pleasure and pain in Indian innovation, by the way. My lectures are always, by the way, good news followed by bad news, followed by good news, followed by bad news. So you will have to bear with me. I will end with the good news, don't worry about that. But this is going to be the pattern. So, if you look at the Indian innovation story, you will find the pleasure was when Ashok Jhunjhunwala developed wireless local loop technology. That was a great achievement from IIT Madras. But the pain was when this technology has to get implemented in Brazil and Madagascar before moving to India. And I can give a 1-hour lecture on why this happened, but I'm not going to do that. But India has been always a pleasure and a pain story. Now, why is this so? It is so for this reason, a fundamental. research converts money into knowledge. Government keeps on giving us money. I'm not talking about a private sector institution like this. But government keeps on giving us money and we keep on producing knowledge in form of papers. Good, bad, whatever standard it is. That's simple. But the next one is innovation converts knowledge into money. That is tough. Okay? How do you take research and innovation together? So it should not be just research, but research and innovation. And that is the challenge that I'm going to talk about. In fact, there are often debates in India about this, because Saraswati and Lakshmi, we actually do their puja separately. We don't link Saraswati to Lakshmi, so as to say. How do you do that? And this was one of the interviews where there were some controversial statements that were made when we introduced the Bayh-Dole equivalent of Act in order that our universities, their research can be fructified into industrial products. And there was a big debate. I had given this particular interview. But you have to look at the inspiring stories from Saraswati to Lakshmi, and look at Stanford, look at MIT, look at Cambridge, look at Oxford. Challenge is, when will we see this in India? For example, if you look at Silicon Valley history, you find, for example, defense to integrated circuits to personal computers to internet, how those innovation networks and the waves, one after the other, actually came up. I've left aside the biotechnology. But I must recognize that innovation ecosystem will have 5 pillars. The first is the academic culture promoting science entrepreneurs. The second is intellectual property awareness and culture. The third is adventure capital. I don't call it venture capital, it has to be adventure capital, early stage financing. I think it's extremely important. We have more of private equity rather than really risk financing. Conducive government policies. Great innovations can be killed if the government policies are not right. And the last one is supportive regulatory regimes. As you know, we have difficulty in India today on doing translational research as far as clinical research for a variety of regulatory reasons, to which repeated reference has been made not only by the Indian pharma but now by the government. Then how do you move from, let's say, discovery of a molecule to finally tablet? It's going to be tough if we don't have that. So all these 5 factors are important. Let us look at one after the other and how the others have done it. The Cambridge phenomenon. The Cambridge University Vice Chancellor has created what is called as a circle of advisors. I happen to be a member, Ratan Tata happens to be a member. And last year in July, I remember we had the first meeting when he made a presentation. And in that presentation, he said proudly that Cambridge University has 86 Nobel laureates, one university. But it has had 1,500 startup companies, creating 45,000 jobs, and 5 companies having turnover of $1 billion plus, with 2 of them $10 billion plus. Saraswati and Lakshmi. Okay? Excellence, and that is what institutions have to build. Balance of excellence and relevance. Excellence in terms of Nobel Prizes or cutting-edge research, breakthroughs, advancing knowledge, but relevance in economic and social terms, basically. Creation of jobs and the rest of it. Great universities, great academic institutions do that balance. And look at the way they had little respect for intellectual property, applied a liberal attitude to what academics did. Industrial liaison was merely a window of what university did, and little exchange or dialogue. And from that, they changed dramatically. And Cambridge now, if you see, starting here, and if you go through years, 70s, 80s, 90s, these are all companies, startup companies that have come in the Cambridge Technology and Innovation Park. It's absolutely incredible, this place. So my dream, our vision how do we make it happen in India? You know, the incubators, the accelerators, you know, the whole thriving atmosphere, you know, where we can create this technopreneurship, if I may use that word. You look at MIT, for example. Academic research on one hand and the commercial enterprise on the other hand, there's a big gap because of these risks. And how do they bridge the risk? And I'm very happy Desh Deshpande, their alumni, but a proud Indian, has done this by creating new sort of initiatives like the GRAND program, Catalyst program, and so on and so forth, and thus creating this missing bridge. And you see other examples. Every October I spend my time as a visiting professor in Harvard University. This year I couldn't go because of this extra responsibility of the Swachh Bharat Technology Committee. And one of my collaborators is George Whitesides. He's the most cited scientist in the world. You know, normally we look at H-index in science. His H-index is 176 by all. It's incredibly high. If you are 20, 30, 40, you feel lucky. 176. But at the same time, the market cap of his companies that he has set up, 12 companies, is close to $30 billion. Saraswati and Lakshmi, no issues at all on that, you know. Challenge is, when are we going to create those Whitesides? Within CSR, I remember when we talked about the CSR transformation that was highlighted as 10 topmost achievements of science and technology, at least as far as Jayant Narlikar was concerned. I still remember Business India carried cover story, CEO of CSR Incorporated, on the CSR transformation, by the way, on which now, even in the Managing Radical Change the Best, you know, that book, Soumitra Ghoshal, before he died, he had edited that. The only institutional change, otherwise all the usual suspects are there, you know, the Reliance, Infosys, and so on. The only chapter on transformation there is that of CSR, by the way. Now, within that transformation, we tried to talk about this Saraswati, Lakshmi, building the bridge and trying to create that. And that is having its influence now in many different ways. Here is Rajesh Gokhale receiving the Bhatnagar Prize from our Prime Minister, by the way, which is the highest science prize you can get until 45 in the country. But this scientist is becoming a science entrepreneur. Look at him, along with Rajiv Mantri and Shiradi Sengupta. They have created Vyam Bioscience, right? A company, a startup. I happen to chair the board, and they are looking at cutting-edge technology, including functional genomics, nanotechnology, etc., to create not again the best practice, but the next practice, so as to say, you know, in terms of creating new products. And I absolutely love that. When a Bhatnagar awardee, a top-class scientist, I'm drawing parallel with George Whitesides. You know, this is beginning to happen. The issue is, we are very fond of showing isolated examples. How do we multiply it? How do we scale it? How do we make sure that there is not one Rajesh Gokhale, but there are, you know, hundreds of thousands of them? And that is where our challenge is. Because if you look at the United States of America, they have, on the average, around 60,000 technology startups. China was nothing now, but now it's about 6,000. India is not even 600. So we have a long way to go to actually create those. That's the point I'm trying to sort of emphasize. Now, if you look at the innovation, national innovation ecosystem, because that is what is missing, that's what we want to build. So there, the second important point is intellectual property awareness, and why that is important. You remember I said innovation converts knowledge into money? But it is not just knowledge. Any knowledge cannot be converted into money. It has to be monetizable knowledge. Okay? And you can monetize something when you can demonstrate that the property belongs to you. It's very simple. Like you are trying to sell your house, you have to show that you know, that physical property belongs to you. In the same way, the intellectual property. Somehow or other, we did not have the patent literacy. And I illustrated in my book by saying the pleasure was when a great leader in Indian science publishes some breakthrough scientific results on carbon nanotubes. Incredible work. But the sad part of it was that I got a study done. Bakul, we had created a unit on research and development in information products in Pune when I was the DG. So they are able to do due diligence on patents, find white spaces, look at competitive intelligence, and so on and so forth. So I said, based on the scientific research that is done in India, just because they have some very sophisticated special software by which they can find anything practically. Who is writing the patents? Because India creates ideas, money is made, but not in India, elsewhere. So how do you do that? So I picked up one of our greatest scientists in the country and said, do background research on him. And what did you find? He would publish a paper, and within 18 months to 24 months, a Japanese company will just tweak it and create regular patents. So, ladies and gentlemen, the good news is that Indian science will make money, but the bad news is, but in Japan, not in India. Indian ideas supported by Indian taxpayers have to create money. So you can't have that intellectual arrogance and say we don't believe in this. I'm sorry. Alright, it's a poor country still. And wealth has to be created here. And that is what I'm going to come back. How do we actually do that? So in NCL, I remember in early 90s when I took over, 89, that was precisely when I took over, we changed the paradigm of NCL, National Chemical Laboratory. And I'll give a bit of a background to you because this is how innovation proceeds. 89, Bakul, is 2 years before 91, right? And I remember at that time, import substitution was the buzzword, right? Reverse engineering, they used to call it in British terms. And my challenge was that any time NCL did something which was ahead of the rest of the world, and I went to Indian industry, they would say, but have they done it? That means has Japan done it, has US done it, has Europe done it? If they have not done it, how can we do it? That confidence was not there. So I had a big challenge. I said, for my whole life, am I going to be doing reverse engineering, copying? And then when in difficulty, I asked myself a fundamental question. I said, what am I selling? Knowledge. What is my market? The whole world. 1989, not 1991. So I said, we license our knowledge to the best in the world. And for some reason, I took the name of General Electric. Because, I'm a polymer guy, so there was certain work that GE was doing. I made a reference to that. Somebody from the audience came to me, a young man, and he said, sir, what are you talking about? Do you realize that General Electric's R&D budget is 3 times India's R&D budget? India's. So I remember telling him, it is not the size of the budget that matters, it is the size of the idea that matters. And since you talked about General Electric, we'll take on General Electric. They had 40% share of the polycarbonate, by the way, which is an engineering plastic. And we said we'll create intellectual property in that area where they are leaders and sell it to them. Looked impossible. But I'm very happy to tell you that we actually did it. We licensed our intellectual property. What is the story? In fact, this great work that was done by Dr. Sivaram, my student Ravindranath, Iyer, etc., actually led to US patents on something that GE had never been able to think or do. And in fact, as it rightly says here, close to $15 million of income has come in 8 years. And I remember 1992 when we licensed 3 patents for close to $1 million to General Electric. That was the first reverse transfer of technology. Because otherwise they're beggars and borrowers, And it is unbelievable, Bakul, it's very interesting, that the same laboratory, which was just import substituting, copying, you know, and they were doing it well, by the way. Don't forget that green revolution would not have taken place without the pesticides, insecticides and so on, you know, agrochemicals. And 70% to 75% of them were based on CSR technologies. So we are doing a good job on copying, but it was always first to India, not first to the world. This had to be the first to the world. So those were transformational times, you know, in terms of demonstrating to our people that you are experts in copying, but you can actually. So I always say, there's no limit to your imagination excepting the limits that you put on yourself. Go beyond them. And once you raise those benchmarks, you know, you start going beyond that. This was a brilliant example. And that is how the Jack Welch R&D Center came up, by the way. Here, Krishna and they are signing. And if you visit that, you will find a conference room named after, one conference room named after one Raghunath Mashelkar there. In terms of the kind of partnership that we built and the way they actually went there. So I'm just trying to demonstrate that India is capable of innovating, thinking beyond the realms of possibility, getting competitive, you know, and providing thought leadership is the issue of changing our mindset that yes, we can, and then we will. US patents granted to CSIR, for example, you can see the rise. This is roughly where I became the Director General of CSIR, and you can see the rise. And in fact, we used to be right at the bottom, and there were a couple of years when CSIR was at the top, even ahead of Samsung Electronics and LG. This is for Asia, by the way. So we could demonstrate that we could do that. But it's not merely getting patents, because patents is potentially monetizable knowledge. You must be able to license it. And you can see now how we are, for example, there is streptokinase, natural streptokinase. When our DG, we had licensed it for about $1 million. The recombinant one, on which we had strong patents, we licensed for about $10 million. And now there is a clot-specific streptokinase breakthrough that we had, which we have licensed for $150 million, which is the highest licensing fee that any Indian enterprise, by the way, has been able to get. So it is possible to actually move. I'm projecting this not only to demonstrate to you that it can be done, but that we have done. Now, in the mantras that I talked about, there are 5 things that become very important when it comes to enterprise innovation, because you will be all interested not in just public institutions like us doing whatever they are doing, but what do the enterprises do, what the industry. I would say first, they must build innovation leaders, okay? Second, they must succeed by end-to-end innovation, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Third, we must understand the issue of talent, technology, tolerance. These 3 go together. Talent, technology, trust, they go together. Then move from R&D to C&D. What is C&D? R&D is research and development. C&D is connect and develop, so as to say, you know. It is co-creation, more now than sort of individual enterprises. And realize the power of innovation. I'm going to come to that at the end for global leadership. So let me take you through these one after the other. Innovation leaders. Now there are some special characteristics of these people. Right? First, they find opportunities where others see nothing. Very important. They convert problems into an opportunity. Just to give an example, you know how Velcro was born. The gentleman who created Velcro used to take his dog out for a walk every morning. And those thorny seeds used to get stuck, you know, on the dog. And every day he was clearing those. All of us also clear and we'll keep on cursing those. But he saw something else. When he saw the structure of the thorny seeds, he conceived Velcro. And Velcro today is a $500 million product, right? All of us use those caps and so on and so forth. But it came by somebody seeing a problem, that is the thorny seeds in his back, as an opportunity, which is Velcro. How do we change that mindset? Most of the time, we happen to be part of a problem. We don't look at being part of a solution. How do we change that? It is fundamental to become a great innovator. They set quantum goals. They are not happy with small goals. Drive discontinuity. They encourage risk. Now, the challenge that we all have is traditional mindsets. Supposing there is a new idea that is being discussed, and that is how typically the conversation will go. Somebody will say, too risky, don't touch it. Somebody will say, suppose it fails, fear of failure. Somebody will say, impossible, never done before. Never done before. iPhone, iPad, never done before, they can't be done. Is it? No. Next, somebody has tried it already and has not worked. And if you have a sophisticated English, by the way, you would say, let me play devil's advocate. Okay, but what it means is that I'm scared. What you have to do in order to become an innovation institute, innovation enterprise, is that make sure that this vocabulary just vanishes. Very important. The other issue is understand what the innovation leader is. Innovation leader is one who does not know that it cannot be done. If he writes down his profession, he would say making impossible possible. Simple. And innovation leader is one who sees what everyone else sees, but thinks of what no one else thinks. Like those thorny seeds, everybody was seeing them, right? But this gentleman saw a product in it. So as to say, how do you develop that ability in our students? The 5 mantras, as I said, is succeed by end-to-end innovation. And let me take you through this. See, bulk of the time when we talk about innovation, people refer to technological innovation. And that is where we are going down in ranks vis-a-vis the other nations. That is fine. But what are we particularly good at? Business model innovation, workflow innovation, organizational innovation, research process innovation, system delivery innovation, and policy. And mind you, technological innovation in isolation just doesn't work. I think it has to be combination of all these which will finally work. Now, in that, let's move on to this talent, technology and tolerance issue. I remember at National Chemical Laboratory, I created what is called the Kite Flying Fund. 1% of my budget was kept on ideas that were outlandish. That means you were given a license to fail, and it was encouraged. And some remarkable breakthroughs came as a result of that, because people felt the freedom to really try out things that were out of the box. No great products came out. I remember some great conceptual breakthroughs, even a paper in Science, a paper in Nature appeared because people thought out of the way. When I went to CSIR and became the Director General, as was mentioned, 38 labs spread from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, I didn't call it a kite flying fund, I called it a new idea fund. Because the Parliament was just 1 kilometer away. The moment I would have called kite flying fund, Parliament questioned how public funds are being used for kite flying and so on and so forth. And it is remarkable, you know. Again, I kept a very small budget for this. And you find, I mean, in fact, there are 2 US patents on spin computers that came out, by the way, by Chandra Kumar. But as usual, we stopped at patenting. We didn't have the other innovation ecosystem to take it forward. But breakthroughs actually like that came. And then at a national level, and I will talk to you about that later, at the Pride in India level, I created New Millennium Indian Technology Leadership Initiative. I'll explain that to you a little later. But what about enterprises? This is about institutions. I remember Ratan Tata had invited me to speak in an offsite that they were having before I got onto their board, 2005, in Goa, to talk about innovation as a way of life. Right? And I remember saying there that risk-taking is very important in innovation. And I said, a friend of mine who is the CEO of a company in US was visiting India, and he said something interesting. He said, we don't hang people who make mistakes, but we hang people who don't take risks. What do you do in India? I said, we hang people who take risks. And there was a laughter. There is only one person who didn't laugh, Ratan Tata. And during tea, he asked me, what do we do in Tatas, you know, in order to promote this? I said, celebrate those who dare to try. Alright? But if they had succeeded, it would have been game changing. So he created an award called Daring to Try, by the way. And it is here. This is the only company, and one more I will show, who actually celebrate failure, just like they did, they do in US. And it is amazing, you know, just last year I was the chief guest for the function where the Innovation Awards of the Year were given. And there were 3 stalls. The first stall was, yes, we did it. That means we were successful. The second was, yes, we are at it. But the third was, we tried but failed. What a great stall it was, where you celebrated your failures. Had you succeeded, you would have changed the game. That is the new spirit that we need to have. Mahindra also, by the way, they call it Failed Innovation Award. I told them on the other day, I think you better give it a positive sort of connotation, but the fact that they are promoting this is wonderful. So that is a spirit that is very important in innovation. The New Millennium Indian Technology Leadership Initiative, when I left and retired as a DG of CSI, there were more than 100 private sector companies, over 250 institutions. We gave soft loan to companies and grant to institutions, and it was competitive funding on the basis of Indian grand challenges. And I remember year 2000 when I started, I wrote down myself these challenges, and 10,000 pamphlets were distributed. And then you will ask me, come on, why did you waste paper? Well, it was obvious I'm talking about India of 2000. Today I will do it completely differently. And they went to colleges, universities, institutions. More than 1,000 ideas came out of which we selected 7, by the way. But the challenge was typically like this. The personal computer at that time was something like 80,000. Can you do it in 10,000? You know, I mean, that was a challenge. And MIT also, by the way, came out with $100 laptop, but I just want to point out, we did it in 2000. This is 2005, by the way, Negro Fantasy. And the mobile desktop PC was developed, and Mr. Kapil Sibal, the Minister of Science and Technology, released it on 10 May 2005. You see all 3 of us, including, most importantly, Vinay Deshpande here, you know. But then this is the story of National Innovation Ecosystem, 2005, but it took quite a while before it got converted into what is called as DSK Mobilis, as actually a product. Because there have to be support systems as we move forward, basically, you see. The government has to come in with help. Like, for example, assured offtake in order to get the volumes going to start with so that the costs come down, market feeding takes place and so on and so forth. Without that, these things cannot happen. Unfortunately, that was not available, but this product is in the marketplace. But then, finally, that $35 tablet that we talk about, you know, and it is not so much the product in the hand of the minister, but the product in the hand of the user that actually matters. And here the government is taking very positive steps in terms of giving that initial offtake in large numbers in order to sort of help. And you can just imagine how transformative this would be if there is 1 tablet per child in India. And we are looking at the digital India of our future, and that has to be built from here. Second part, the last part of my talk, is on Indian Innovation 2.0. What would it be? First, it will be integrative. Secondly, inclusive. And third, disruptive. Now, in terms of integrative, it will be integrated across technologies, geographies, industries, markets, and customers. Inclusive part is very important, because I go back to that slide when I showed that we are slipped from 62 to 64, 64 to 66 to 76, right? Now, while that is happening, that's the reality, and as I said, that is because mainly it measures technological innovation. India changing the innovation dictionary. And there are new terms that are appearing in innovation dictionary which are simply because of India. But it's a contrast. You know, on one hand, in those rankings with those parameters we are slipping, but on the other hand, we are changing the dictionary. How does it happen? So, if you look at just in these 5 years, frugal innovation is a term that dominates today. Inclusive innovation is all across. Gandhian innovation, reverse innovation, and more from less for more. And that means more from less for not more profit, but also more from less for more people. It's a new paradigm. And these are now today dominating the dictionary. You look at now, let us say, getting more performance from less resource for more people, and this is now being called as an MLM paradigm, by the way. It is used in the common jargon of many companies. In fact, I found Sikka, who has taken over Infosys, using this as in annual address, you know, work from less for more, which is wonderful. Now, I remember this paper that CK and I wrote, CK Prahlad, you know, legendary CK. This turned out to be his last paper, by the way. After this, in a couple of months, he passed away. This paper was published in Harvard Business Review. And the title of this paper was Innovation's Holy Grail, MLM, more from less for more. And what we did in this particular paper was to look at India and Indian innovation. And how scarcity on one hand and aspiration on the other hand is a deadly combination which gives rise to innovation. You know? And that paper now has been ranked as the top 10 must-read innovation papers, by the way. The book has come out in that. And last year in July opinion survey, it was ranked as the top one. And more importantly, this paper which got published in July, August, the World Economic Forum, in 6 months, had a special session on more from less for more. And I'll explain to you why it caught the attention. Now, the attention was caught because this paper was showing that how, despite income inequality, how can we assure access equality? Which is a contradiction in terms, isn't it? If you don't have income, you don't have access. And what we are saying is, despite income inequality, you will have access equality. Is it possible? See it here. How do you have that? What is the income inequality? It will be 1,000:1, but the access equality is 1:1. Both of them are on their mobiles. How does that happen? 3 things.